Hello. My name is Marilyn Drouet. At my parents' 50th anniversary party, before the salad was even served, my father shoved me to the floor. My mother told me to get up because that seat belonged to my sister. Nobody flinched. Nobody helped. The next morning, I had 51 missed calls. Why? Because I wasn't just the forgotten daughter. I was the executor of a will they thought they'd buried. And I buried their lies instead. But what kind of family tries to erase you from your own bloodline? And how far would you go to remind them you were never invisible to begin with? It was one of those afternoons Napa Valley is famous for: golden air, soft wind moving through the rows of grapevines behind my parents' villa. The world outside looked like a painting, but inside the house, every smile felt rehearsed. I parked a few minutes past 5, smoothing the wrinkles out of my navy dress before stepping out of the car. In my hand, I carried a small velvet box with my grandmother's locket inside. Henrietta had given it to me when I was 16, whispering that family gold meant nothing without honesty. I still believed her words that day, maybe because I wanted to. Inside, the living room was loud. Relatives filled every corner, glasses clinking, waiters weaving through conversations. The air smelled of roast lamb and expensive wine. Marilyn, someone called, an aunt, probably, but it was more an acknowledgement than a greeting. My father, Carl, stood near the fireplace, tall, silver-haired, wearing the same confident grin he always used for company. My mother, Vera, fluttered around him like a hostess trying too hard to look gracious. I walked toward the long dining table, decorated with white roses and gold cutlery. There was one empty chair near the head of the table, the spot I used to share with Grandma before she passed. For a second, I hesitated. Then I sat. It felt right. The kind of right you don't question until someone reminds you that you shouldn't feel it. I caught the shift in the air before I even looked up. My sister, Callista, had just walked in. The shimmer of her silver gown caught every light in the room. She laughed, tossed her hair, kissed cheeks, made every camera flash. She had always known how to turn attention into oxygen. I gave her a polite nod. She returned it with a glance so thin it could slice glass. "Dinner's ready." Vera's voice floated across the room. Guests began finding seats, the murmur of conversation blending with soft jazz. My father raised his glass, ready to toast his 50 years of marriage. I waited for a moment when I could speak, something simple, something about family. "Before you start," I began softly, "I just wanted to say how much Grandma would have loved." "Marilyn." My mother's voice cracked through mine like the edge of a knife. Every head turned. "What?" I asked, blinking. "That seat's not for you. Get up." For a second, I thought she was joking. Then my father's hand landed on my shoulder, heavy, unyielding. He didn't yell, he didn't have to. The pressure spoke for him. The next moment, the floor met my knees, glass shattered, red wine spread across my dress like a wound. I heard the gasps. The band stopped mid-note. "Dad, please, not here," Callista said, her tone dripping with staged concern. But when our eyes met, she looked triumphant. The silence that followed was worse than the shove. Dozens of relatives, people who'd watched me grow up, turned their faces away. Nobody reached for me. Not one hand. My cousin whispered something to his wife. She looked down quickly, pretending to fix her napkin. I gathered the pieces of the broken glass myself, wine staining my fingers crimson. I could smell the tannin and humiliation. My mother bent slightly, her perfume thick and sugary, her voice soft enough that only I could hear. "You should have known better. This is Callista's day." Something inside me folded in on itself. I stood, straightened my dress, and smoothed my hair. Of course, I said quietly. There was no tremor in my voice, just a flatness that surprised me. I stepped back, nodded to the nearest waiter to clean the spill, and forced a smile that tasted like metal. The music started again, cautious, as if the room wanted to pretend nothing had happened. Callista took my old seat beside our father, touching his arm lightly. Guests clapped as she lifted her glass. To family, she said. I almost laughed at the irony. I needed air. I walked past the bar, out the back door, onto the patio. Fairy lights blinked across the vineyard like distant stars. The cool night air hit my face, carrying the scent of roses and the faint buzz of crickets. I leaned against the railing, clutching Grandma's locket in my palm. My reflection shimmered in the wine glass I still held. They think I'm gone, I whispered. But they've just reminded me who I am. My voice didn't shake. The anger in me wasn't loud, it was steady, deliberate. I stayed there a while, watching the sky shift from gold to indigo. The villa behind me filled again with laughter. Through the window, I saw my sister now standing where I'd been. She raised her champagne flute toward the guests. My parents beamed beside her, proud and radiant. For a long minute, I let myself feel it all, humiliation, anger, and something sharper, cleaner, clarity. They had taken my place, but they couldn't take what was left of my grandmother's faith in me. That locket in my hand was more than jewelry. It was proof that I belonged, even if they pretended I didn't. I slipped it around my neck and turned toward the path leading to the parking lot. The crunch of gravel under my heels sounded final. I didn't look back again until I reached my car. Through the rear window, the glow of the villa still burned against the hills. It looked beautiful from the outside, like a perfect American family frozen in celebration. But I knew better. Sitting in the driver's seat, I let the engine idle. My hands trembled once, then steadied. I thought about Grandma Henrietta, about every quiet moment she told me to stay still and listen before acting. They'll underestimate you because you're silent, and that's how you'll win, she used to say. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, wine stains gone dry, eyes darker than before. If they took my seat tonight, I said out loud, I'll take back everything they built on it. The words came out calm, almost gentle, but inside me, something new took root. Not rage, resolve. I drove away slowly, headlights slicing through the fog rolling down the valley. Behind me, the laughter echoed faintly, fading with the distance. Ahead, the road curved upward into darkness. Somewhere in that darkness waited the proof that I hadn't lost everything, not yet. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone to vent or seek sympathy. I poured myself a glass of water at the small inn where I was staying, sat by the window, and listened to the hum of the ceiling fan. When I closed my eyes, I saw my father's hand pushing me down, my sister's smirk, my mother's whisper. And over all of it, Grandma's voice again, wait. Watch. Then act. I smiled for the first time that day. They thought they had humiliated me. They didn't realize they had just given me a reason. The laughter from the villa had followed me like an echo I couldn't silence. Back in the small guest house on the edge of the vineyard, I sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on, dress wrinkled and sticky with dried wine. The room smelled faintly of lavender detergent, but nothing about it felt clean. I turned off the lamp, then turned it back on again. Sleep wouldn't come, it just hovered somewhere outside my reach. I made coffee even though it was close to midnight. The cup rattled against the saucer as I carried it to the window. Outside, the party lights shimmered far away across the valley. Through the glass I could almost hear my sister's voice, the careful pitch she used when she wanted to sound humble in public. I pulled out my phone, scrolling without thinking. There she was. Callista, smiling in the same dress that had caught every light earlier. The caption beneath the photo read, humbled and honored to carry the legacy of the Vincenzio family forward. Underneath, hundreds of comments praised her grace, her beauty, her dedication. My father's hand rested on her shoulder in the photo, right where mine had been hours ago. For a long time, I stared at that image. It wasn't anger that filled me at first, it was disbelief, a kind of cold recognition. So this was how quickly they rewrote the story. The ink of the evening hadn't even dried, and I was already erased. I closed my phone and set it on the nightstand, feeling the weight of every unspoken sentence pressing against my ribs. I didn't sleep. I packed my small overnight bag before dawn, drove the rental car north towards San Francisco. The sky lightened as I passed the empty roads along the coast. The ocean on my right was gray and restless. The longer I drove, the more the sound of the party faded from memory, replaced by another voice, the soft rasp of my grandmother's. Tacoma, 3 years earlier. The smell of mint tea and cedarwood still lived somewhere in my brain. Henrietta had been thinner then, her hands a map of veins and time. She'd called me into her bedroom one morning. "Close the door, honey," she said. "I need you to listen." I sat on the edge of her bed, expecting small talk, but her eyes were sharper than I remembered. "This family," she said slowly, "has forgotten what loyalty means. And someday, they'll forget your name too. When that happens, I'm giving you something they can't erase." From her bedside drawer, she took out a small metal key attached to a faded blue ribbon, and a sealed envelope. "Don't open this until you have to," she whispered. "You'll know when the time comes. And Marilyn, when it does, don't argue. Act." I remember nodding, confused. I didn't ask questions then. Maybe I didn't want to know what she meant. When she passed 2 months later, I tucked the key and envelope into a jewelry box, telling myself I'd keep them for sentiment. But after what happened in Napa, I knew this was the time she had warned me about. 2 weeks later, back home in Seattle, the rain had already started its winter rhythm against my apartment windows. The city felt like a clean slate, gray, quiet, mercifully indifferent. I set the safe key on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long while before finally calling a locksmith. He came the next morning, a polite young man who didn't ask questions. The small leather safe looked ancient, its hinges stiff, corners scuffed from decades of use. When the lock finally clicked open, something inside me shifted too. The smell of old paper rose up, a mixture of dust and lavender oil. Inside were neat stacks of documents tied with a thin red ribbon, property titles, investment portfolios, and one thick envelope marked "Last Will and Testament of Henrietta Drouet." My breath caught when I unfolded it. Her handwriting curved across the first page, deliberate, steady. And there, right beneath the legal heading, was a line that made my knees weak: "The sole executor of this estate shall be my granddaughter, Marilyn Drouet." For a moment, I just stood there staring. Executor. Not Callista. Not Vera. Not Carl. Me. A single tear slid down my cheek, landing on the edge of the paper. It wasn't sadness, it was recognition, the sharp relief of being seen after so long of pretending I didn't care. My grandmother had known exactly what she was doing. I sat at the table for hours, reading every line, cross-checking dates and signatures. Everything was legally airtight, witnessed, notarized, untouched since her passing. She'd protected her legacy in silence, the same way I had learned to protect myself. I reached for my phone, hesitated, then dialed a number I hadn't used in years: Mr. Langley, our family's old estate lawyer. The call went to voicemail. I left a short message: "Mr. Langley, this is Marilyn. I have my grandmother's original will. Please call me back. I think it's time." After hanging up, I leaned back in my chair. Through the window, the rain had turned into mist, the kind that hangs in the air like memory. I whispered to the empty room, they shoved the executor of the will to the floor. The absurdity of it made me almost laugh. I poured myself tea and placed the will back into the safe, locking it gently this time. The key felt warm in my palm. Grandma hadn't just left me property, she'd left me leverage, truth, and something my family never expected me to have, power. For the first time in years, I slept deeply. When I woke, sunlight cut through the blinds in soft gold stripes. My phone buzzed with a new voicemail. "Marilyn," a familiar male voice said. "This is Langley. I'll review the documents today. Call me when you're ready to act on your rights." I smiled. The sound of rain still lingered, but the weight in my chest was gone. I closed the safe, slid it back under the bed, and reached for my coat. As I locked the apartment door behind me, I felt something settle inside, resolve. The first blow they gave me had been physical, public, humiliating. The next one, I decided, would be quiet and strategic. They thought I was weak because I didn't scream. But I'd learned from them how to cut without raising your voice, how to wound with a smile, how to erase someone with a headline. The lessons they'd given me, directly and otherwise, had been brutal, but thorough. It was 2 days after I'd spoken to Langley, my grandmother's lawyer, when the message came. I had just returned from the grocery store, a paper bag tucked under one arm and my phone still buzzing in my other hand. A text popped up from a former colleague at a design firm I hadn't worked with in years. "Hey, this looks really familiar. Didn't you do something like this for your family way back?" I dropped the groceries on the kitchen island and opened the link she sent. And there it was. Callista. Center stage. Hair like spun gold under professional lighting, dressed in a crisp white blazer that made her look like the CEO of the century. Behind her, a digital banner displayed the words, "Vincenzio Legacy, a new era begins." But it wasn't the slogan that caught my eye. It was the logo. A stylized vine wrapped around a diamond, my design. Mine. I'd sketched it on a napkin 10 years ago during one of the few family brainstorming sessions where I was actually invited. At the time, they dismissed it. Too modern, Carl had said. Vera thought it was too abstract. Callista laughed outright. Now it was front and center in what looked like a 7-figure launch. I stood there in my kitchen, a half-gallon of oat milk sweating through the bag behind me, and felt that old familiar tightening in my chest. Not panic, something sharper. Violation. The video continued with Callista speaking at a podium. "Our internal team really captured the spirit of who we are as a family," she said. "Rooted in tradition, but always growing." She didn't even blink. Her face was composed, polished, the kind of calm that only comes with years of getting exactly what you want. I turned the video off. My mouth had gone dry. My hands, though, were steady. I didn't call anyone. I didn't rage post or write a clever, biting comment. I didn't text Callista, demanding an explanation. I didn't expect one. If I'd learned anything from our family dynamic, it was that accountability was a myth, and silence always benefited the loudest voice in the room. Instead, I walked over to my bookshelf and pulled out a black folder. Labeled in my handwriting, years ago, proof of origin. I'd kept it mostly out of habit, old design drafts, and used contracts, email exchanges about logo concepts. Not because I thought I'd need them, but because I knew, somehow, I might. I flipped through the contents, a series of logo iterations, dated and signed. The email from Marco, the designer I'd collaborated with. Even a photo of the original napkin sketch, stained with coffee and folded twice. It was all here. Quiet, unquestionable proof. I sat back, letting the weight of what I was holding settle in. They hadn't just taken my idea. They'd taken my silence as permission. The next morning, I woke early. The city outside was still asleep, the streets wet from a late-night drizzle. I made a pot of coffee, opened my laptop, and typed in Callista's name. Her Instagram was the top result. She'd posted a new caption to go with her keynote photo. For years, I've poured my heart into building this brand. I've studied our family history, dug deep into our values. This isn't just a product launch, it's a legacy. The comments rolled in. You're such an inspiration. So proud of everything you've built. Finally, the daughter who gets it. I read every word. Not one mention of me. Not even a veiled nod to the fact that the entire foundation of her rebrand had been lifted, pixel for pixel, from the sister she'd publicly humiliated less than a month ago. It was one thing to be erased. It was another to be overridden. I closed the page and opened a new tab. I created a secure cloud folder and uploaded every file, every draft, every date-stamped concept, every receipt that linked me to that logo. I scanned in the napkin sketch for good measure. Then I wrote a short, concise email to a copyright attorney in San Francisco. She'd helped me once years ago on a branding dispute. We weren't close, but she was competent and ruthless. Just what I needed. Subject, urgent, copyright violation, personal branding. Body. Hi, Eleanor. I hope you're well. I've recently discovered unauthorized usage of an original logo design I created, which is now being used in a major brand launch. All related materials are in the attached folder. Please review and let me know how best to proceed. I'd prefer to handle this quietly, but firmly. Best. Marilyn Drouet. After sending the email, I sat back in my chair, exhaled slowly, and stared at the ceiling. The air in the room felt heavier, as if it had soaked up every word I'd held in all these years. I wasn't looking for revenge. I didn't want a viral takedown or family drama exploding online. I just wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside my own memory. A space where it couldn't be edited or deleted. Later that evening, I took a walk through the neighborhood. The chill had returned, but I welcomed it. With each step, I repeated the same sentence in my mind: you didn't imagine this. It helped. Not much, but enough. Back home, I checked my inbox. A reply had already arrived from Eleanor. Got it. Reviewing now. And Marilyn, this is solid. Very solid. Let's talk tomorrow. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just powered off the laptop, washed the dishes, and poured myself a glass of water. They had made their move, bold, polished, and public. Now it was my turn. And unlike them, I wouldn't need to shout. The first thing I did the next morning was open the curtains. The Seattle sky hung low and gray, the kind of sky that made you feel time itself had slowed down. I made a cup of black coffee and stood by the window, watching drops of rain chase each other down the glass. My mind was clear, cold, exact. It wasn't anger anymore, it was purpose. By 10:30, I had triple-checked the attachments, verified every signature, every notarized seal. The cursor blinked in the email window, patient but expectant. The subject line read, Executor Notification, Estate of Henrietta Drouet. I stared at it once, took a breath, and hit send at 10:34. The email shot through cyberspace, landing in the inboxes of my father, my mother, my sister, their lawyer, and 3 of the family investors who had always smiled too widely when the money was good. For a second, the apartment felt still, like the world had paused just to hear the click of that send button. Then it exhaled. Inside the email, I'd included a certified copy of Grandma's will, the notarized clause naming me as the sole executor, and the legal declaration to freeze all transitions of the estate pending audit. The wording was calm, direct, professional. No accusations. No emotion. Just law. I imagined their faces when they read it, my father's confident grin cracking into confusion, my mother gripping her phone a little tighter, Callista blinking twice before forcing a smile for whatever audience she happened to have nearby. After sending, I printed a copy for myself and placed it beside Grandma Henrietta's portrait on the desk. Her eyes, captured in that faded photo, seemed to follow me as I worked. "I'm not fighting them," I whispered. "I'm restoring what you left me." Then I waited. The waiting was the hardest part. For 6 long hours, nothing came. Not a single reply, not even a read receipt. I ate half a sandwich without tasting it, watered the plant on the kitchen windowsill, checked my email again and again. Still nothing. It wasn't until almost 5 that the silence broke. My phone started buzzing. First, my mother's name appeared. Then my father's. Then Callista's, again and again, until the screen glowed with missed calls stacked on top of each other like accusation after accusation. Then the texts arrived. "Marilyn. This is a misunderstanding. We can talk about this. You don't have to involve outsiders." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my notebook, the same one I'd used during law school when I used to believe in fairness. On a clean page, I wrote, "Control isn't about volume. It's about timing." By 7, the drizzle outside had become steady rain. I poured myself another coffee and sat down at the desk again. I refreshed my inbox and watched the cursor spin. Then it came, a single automatic email from the estate registration portal. "Your executor claim has been acknowledged and filed. Further changes to the estate will be frozen pending review." I read it twice. My pulse didn't race. It slowed, steady as a metronome. At that exact moment, I knew the balance had shifted. They couldn't undo this with a phone call or a fake smile. The law didn't care about charm or money. It cared about documents, seals, dates, and those I had. I stood, crossed to the window, and pushed it open. The rain touched my face, cool and honest. "They finally know who they're dealing with," I said softly. The hours that followed stretched thin. I imagined the dinner table back in Napa, the quiet panic that must have settled once the news reached them. My father pacing near the fireplace, muttering about reputation. My mother trying to keep her voice even, telling him it would all blow over. Callista insisting she could fix it with the right PR statement. They'd always used image as a weapon. They'd forgotten I'd spent years studying how they operated, absorbing every tactic. They taught me how to survive them. That night, I couldn't sleep. The phone lit up periodically with messages, alternating between pleading and passive-aggressive jabs. "We did this for you," my mother wrote. "Don't throw it all away out of spite." Another from Callista, "I'm the face of this family, Marilyn. You were never interested in the business anyway. Why start now?" I turned the phone face down. I wasn't interested in performing for them anymore. I opened my journal again and began to write. The words came slowly, but they were clean and unshakable. This isn't revenge. This is gravity pulling everything back to where it belongs. It hit me then, this was what Grandma had meant when she said, "Act when they try to erase you." She knew it would come to this. She'd seen the cracks long before I did. By morning, the rain had cleared. The air was sharp, washed clean. I walked down to the corner cafe, ordered a croissant and coffee, and sat by the window. Across the street, a woman scolded her teenage son for forgetting his jacket, then pulled him close as they crossed at the light. I smiled. Family could be simple. It could be kind. Just not mine. When I got home, a new message blinked on my laptop, this one from the family lawyer, Anderson and Clark LLP. "Marilyn, your filing has caused significant confusion among the board members. We would appreciate an opportunity to clarify matters before this escalates. I read it 3 times before replying with one sentence: all clarifications can go through probate court. No anger, no threat. Just procedure. Later that afternoon, as I was shredding old bills, another email came from an unfamiliar sender. I clicked it open. Ms. Drouet, your executor status has been officially confirmed by the registrar. Enforcement orders regarding asset transfers will be processed within 48 hours. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my shoulders easing for the first time in weeks. This was it, the first unshakable proof that what I held was real. Outside, the sound of rain returned, tapping softly on the glass. I shut the window halfway, just enough to let the air drift in. I thought about my grandmother again, about the quiet strength she carried even when everyone underestimated her. I understood her now more than ever. It wasn't about winning. It was about restoring the truth without needing applause. By the time the sky turned dark again, I'd stopped waiting for their calls. I knew they wouldn't stop, but they no longer mattered. What mattered was that the balance had finally shifted, and I was no longer the one waiting for their permission to exist. But for every move I made with the law, they answered with manipulation, and this time, they went too far. By the 3rd morning after my legal filing, the air in my apartment felt different, denser somehow, as though it had absorbed the tension of everything that hadn't yet been said. I'd barely finished my 2nd cup of coffee when my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in almost 4 years. "Sweetheart," came the voice I used to recognize in my sleep. "Can we talk like family? We've all been so stressed." Vera. My mother. For a few seconds, I didn't answer. I let the pause stretch out long enough for her to fill it with her own words, the way she always did when she was desperate to control the narrative. "You don't have to be angry, Marilyn," she continued, her tone light, almost trembling. "We all just want peace. What's happening between us doesn't have to turn into a legal war. You know your father's health isn't what it used to be." There it was, the appeal to guilt. It came earlier than I expected. "I'm fine," I said, keeping my voice even. "What do you want?" A pause. Then she softened her tone into that practiced gentleness she'd used when I was a child caught in the crossfire of her arguments with my father. "I'm sending you something to review. It's just a formality. We thought, maybe, you could sign it and help everyone calm down." The email arrived seconds later. The subject line, Family Harmony Acknowledgement. I opened it. The document was clean, professional-looking, and dangerously polite. It was written in legal jargon that almost read like a prayer for unity. For the purpose of restoring familial harmony, all prior executor appointments shall be reassessed by the majority of heirs to ensure equitable distribution. My eyes stopped on that one word, reassessed. I didn't call her out on it. I simply forwarded the document to my attorney, Langley, with a short message. "Thoughts?" He called within 5 minutes. "Do not sign that," he said before I could even speak. His voice had lost its usual calm professionalism. "It's a rights reassignment disguised as a mediation agreement. They're trying to transfer executor control to Callista." So this was their play. The sweet signature trap. I could almost hear my mother's voice saying it aloud. "It's just paperwork, darling. Nothing binding." I thanked Langley, hung up, and stared at the email for a long time. My hand hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't type anything back. Instead, I closed my laptop and leaned against the back of the chair, feeling the pulse in my temples steady into something cold and focused. If they wanted to play polite, I could be the politest of them all. The next morning, Langley and I met over video call. His tie was crooked, and the legal pad in front of him was already filled with scribbled notes. "You said you wanted to act," he reminded me. "This is the time." "I'm ready," I said. "Let's freeze it all." We filed an emergency petition with the California Probate Court to freeze every asset tied to the estate, properties, business accounts, the family trust. Within hours, the paperwork began moving. Langley's team sent cease and desist notices to the Vincenzo Legacy PR firm, the brand's corporate sponsors, and the supposed transition board that Callista had announced during her live stream. The first ripple hit 3 days later. One of the family's Napa Valley suppliers leaked an email to a local reporter. By the end of the week, the headlines were everywhere. Vincenzo family estate dispute halts expansion. Executor legal battle freezes multi-million-dollar venture. I didn't have to say a word. The document spoke louder than any press conference could. Callista's rebranding gala, the one she'd been hyping for months, was suddenly postponed due to unforeseen circumstances. The sponsorship banners vanished from the event website overnight. The publicist released a vague statement about administrative delays. Behind those words, I could hear the panic. I didn't take joy in it. What I felt was quieter, more exact. Justice wasn't supposed to feel explosive, it was supposed to feel balanced. Still, I kept waiting for their next move. And it came sooner than expected. Late one evening, my phone buzzed again. It was another message from Vera. The preview line read, "You've gone too far." I opened it. "You raised me to trust words," I typed back. "Then you used them to trap me." No emojis. No sign-off. Just closure. I placed the phone face down on the table and poured a glass of water. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint city noise drifting through the window. I thought of Grandma Henrietta's handwriting, the way she signed every letter with a flourish as if to say, the truth doesn't need volume, it just needs ink. The following week, the media cycle moved on, but the damage to their empire remained. Every vendor, every investor, every partner had to review their contracts. Without access to the frozen funds, they couldn't continue the expansion. The glossy facade they built around Callista's name had cracked wide open. In the quiet that followed, I started noticing small things. The silence from my parents wasn't just guilt, it was fear. The kind that comes when control slips through your fingers, and you can't stop it no matter how many times you shout. Langley called me again. "You've effectively paralyzed their operation," he said, his voice steady but impressed. "You did it without raising your voice once." I smiled faintly. That was the point. At night, I'd sit by the window and watch the rain return to Seattle, steady and rhythmic. It reminded me of my grandmother's voice, calm and deliberate even when everything around her fell apart. This wasn't vengeance. It was correction. The system they had manipulated for so long was finally working the way it was supposed to. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this was just the beginning. They'd always fought harder when cornered. I could almost hear my mother whispering to my father, "We can't let her win." But the truth was, I'd already won, not because I'd taken their money or their name, but because I'd proven they couldn't bend me anymore. I looked at my reflection in the window, rain streaking down the glass like faint scars. My grandmother's locket glinted faintly against my collarbone. If freezing their money shocked them, what I did next shook their image, and that was unforgivable. By Thursday morning, I'd stopped counting the articles. They seemed to multiply overnight, gossip columns, business blogs, even a segment on local news. The legal freeze had sent shockwaves through the glossy image Callista had spent years curating. What I didn't expect, though, was how fast they'd weaponize sympathy. I was still sipping lukewarm coffee at the kitchen table when my phone started buzzing. Not a call this time, alerts. News apps. Social platforms. A clip had surfaced. It was Carl, my father, sitting stiffly in a studio chair next to Vera. The lighting was soft, the background a tasteful shade of beige, the type they use when they want viewers to feel like they're watching two grieving parents instead of strategic manipulators. The host, a polished man with a too-tight smile, leaned forward. "How are you both holding up, given the recent estate dispute with your youngest daughter, Marilyn?" Carl let out a deep sigh. I recognized the sound. It was the same one he used when he wanted the room to feel sorry for him without having to say the words. "We don't understand," he began, voice thick, almost cracking. "She's always been private. But this? She's turned on her own blood. She's not well." Next to him, Vera offered a slow nod, as if her heart were breaking in real time. "It's just heartbreaking. Families go through hard times, but this level of betrayal, it's just not who we raised her to be." Betrayal. That word caught in my throat like a shard of glass. I watched the clip all the way through. The host thanked them for their time, assured the audience that the Vincenzo family remains committed to unity and legacy. The screen faded to a soft piano outro. I didn't throw my phone. I didn't cry. I just sat there, letting the static of the moment press into my skin. For them, this was war by story. Image was their battlefield. And they knew how to play to the camera like it was a judge and jury. Over the next 2 days, social media turned into a public courtroom. Strangers weighed in like they knew our history. Some called me bitter, spoiled, ungrateful. Others, mostly quiet voices, asked why I had never said anything before. They wondered why a daughter would go to court rather than sit down and talk it out. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I logged out of everything. I wasn't done yet. A week passed. The press began to pivot, but the damage lingered like smoke. Then came the Community Wine Gala, a local charity event my parents had hosted every spring since I was a teenager. It was their pride, their chance to show off how grounded and involved they were. Callista had taken over the event in recent years, turning it into a carefully staged PR moment. I wasn't invited this year, of course. I didn't expect to be. But a friend of mine, an old classmate who now worked with one of the vineyard sponsors, sent me a message with 2 attached photos. "You should see this," he wrote. The first image was a wide shot of the event backdrop. A 10-foot banner stretched across the lawn, printed with a timeline of the Vincenzo family, black and white photos, childhood candidates, promotional shots from the early days of their business. Every major milestone. Every smiling face. Except mine. The second image was a close-up. The 2009 photo from our anniversary launch, one where I stood beside Callista, my hand on Grandma Henrietta's shoulder. I remembered that day vividly. We were all there. I had worn a navy blazer. Vera said I looked too serious for a family event. Still, Grandma had insisted I stand next to her in the center. But in the banner version, I was gone. Cropped out. Reframed. Callista stood solo beside Henrietta now, as if I'd never existed in the shot. The message that followed was brief. "I took that photo. I remember where you stood." I didn't respond right away. I stared at the images, letting them burn into me. This wasn't oversight. This wasn't accidental. This was erasure. They weren't just ignoring me, they were editing me out of the story entirely. One image at a time. One speech at a time. One fake tearful interview at a time. For a moment, I felt breathless, like someone had pulled the air from the room. I closed my laptop and walked to the window. Outside, Seattle looked as it always did in early spring, gray, damp, unapologetically honest. I stood there a while, letting the truth of it settle. They weren't afraid of me. They were afraid of the version of the past that still included me. Later that evening, I opened my laptop again, not to post, not to argue, not to correct anyone, but to collect. I pulled up every original photo I had. Every family portrait. Every group event. Every image where I had once stood shoulder to shoulder with the people who now acted like I never belonged. I created a new folder. Titled it, Uncropped, What They Tried to Erase. I added dates. Context. Even a few notes in Grandma's handwriting where she'd labeled backs of prints. I didn't share it. Not yet. But I made it real. Documented. Irrefutable. They could try to silence me in the media. They could stage their photo ops. But I had the one thing they hadn't counted on, the receipts. They were painting a version of our family where I was the shadow they never had to explain. But shadows don't disappear, they just wait for light. I backed up the folder onto a secure drive and then emailed a copy to Langley. Subject line, for reference. Just in case. He replied an hour later, smart move. It wasn't about revenge. It was about memory. I wasn't going to fight them on their turf anymore. I was going to stand quietly on mine and let the truth speak when it needed to. They wanted a version of the past that looked prettier without me in it. But the truth was never pretty. And when I revealed what they erased, I didn't need a microphone, the truth spoke louder than they ever could. The email came late, almost midnight. I was going through a stack of bills when the notification blinked across my screen. It wasn't from anyone I knew. The subject line read, "You should see this." At first, I thought it was spam, but curiosity won. The attachment was a PDF labeled Last Will, Revision. When I opened it, my chest tightened. The document claimed to be a new version of my grandmother Henrietta's will. Except this one didn't match the original. The font, the format, the phrasing, everything was off. It named Callista as co-executor and mentioned my name only once, in a polite footnote buried near the end, a gesture of gratitude to Marilyn Drouet. A gesture. That word hit like a slap. My hands trembled, but not from fear. From rage, the quiet kind that sharpens instead of burns. I leaned back, staring at the screen until the words blurred. Someone had gone to great lengths to fake this, badly. The watermark on the scanned page was faint, but I could still make it out, Weinberg Legal Consultancy. Callista's husband's firm. My stomach dropped. I called Langley first thing in the morning. He answered on the second ring. "Marilyn, I was just about to call you. I got a strange inquiry from a notary office in Napa asking for verification on your grandmother's will." My voice was calm, deliberate. "They forged it." He didn't even sound surprised. Just tired. "Bring everything. Original copy, the safe key, notarized seals. We're shutting this down." By noon, I was in his office, the rain on my coat soaking through the sleeves. He sat across from me with both versions side by side, the real one I'd found in Grandma's safe and the forgery that had landed in my inbox. Langley ran a thumb along the bottom of the pages. "Different paper stock," he muttered. "Different ink, different witness signatures. Not even close. This is amateur hour. Desperate." He looked up. "You realize what this means, right? They know they're losing. This is their last swing." I nodded. "Then let's make sure it's their last mistake." That afternoon, we drafted a formal fraud allegation. He insisted we file immediately in both the probate and civil courts. "You don't wait for them to apologize," he said. "You bury them in evidence." And that's exactly what we did. 2 days later, while the legal wheels turned, I boarded a morning flight to San Francisco. It was the first time I'd left Seattle since everything began. The plane cabin buzzed with quiet chatter and the smell of coffee. I leaned against the window, watching the clouds slice past below, and tried to steady my thoughts. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about preservation, the truth, the legacy, the woman who believed in me when no one else did. When I landed, I called Marco Aguilar. I hadn't spoken to him in years, not since we'd worked together on the family's first branding project. His voice was the same, gruff but kind. Marilyn. Haven't heard that name in a while. You okay? Not really, I admitted. Do you still have the old logo files? The ones we worked on, the vine and diamond. He chuckled. You mean your design that your sister claimed was hers? I froze. You know about that? Of course I do. It was on every local business page for weeks. Don't worry. I kept everything. Emails, drafts, timestamps. You were the one who sent them to me. Want me to forward them? Yes. Please. His office hadn't changed much when I arrived, a cluttered space filled with half-finished projects, coffee mugs, and the smell of printer toner. He pulled up his email archive on an ancient desktop computer. There, he said, pointing to a message thread from 2013. My name was right there in the sender's field. Attached were the first sketches I'd ever made, scanned and dated. He turned to me, shaking his head. I told your father years ago you designed that. He said it didn't matter. Said branding was a team effort. Team, I repeated quietly, almost to myself. That's one word for theft. Marco forwarded the entire thread to Langley's office while I watched. The email's subject line read, Proof of original work, Marilyn Drouet. When it was done, I thanked him. He shrugged. I just like seeing the right person get credit for once. Outside, the city air was crisp. I walked the few blocks to a cafe and sat by the window, my phone buzzing with notifications. Langley had already replied, got it. Solid evidence. We'll add it to your file immediately. I sipped my coffee slowly, watching people pass by on the sidewalk. Businessmen, couples, a group of tourists taking photos. Normal lives moving forward. Mine was paused between two worlds, the past they kept rewriting and the truth I was finally reclaiming. Later that evening, back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop. My desktop folder, The Truth, itemized, had grown heavy. Dozens of files, each labeled, timestamped, unshakable. Legal documents, original artwork, photos, messages. Proof of every lie they'd told and every attempt to erase me. I added Marco's email to the collection. Then I sat there for a long moment before writing a note to myself at the top of a blank page. They built their empire on edits. I'll restore it with originals. The next morning, my inbox held a new message from Langley, probate hearing confirmed, 2 weeks from Monday. Be ready. I didn't need to read the rest. I knew what that meant. This was the end game. I closed my laptop, the click echoing in the quiet hotel room. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from finality. They won't just hear from me, I whispered. They'll see every word they erased. Outside, the fog over San Francisco rolled in thick, swallowing the lights of the city. It looked like a curtain closing before the final act. The courtroom wasn't the battlefield, it was the burial ground for every lie they built in my name. There was no drama in the courtroom, no raised voices or theatrical objections. The tension wasn't in what people said, it lived in what they didn't. When I stepped into the probate courtroom in San Francisco, it felt like stepping into a room designed to remember. The walls were bare, the light fluorescent, and the rows of chairs empty except for a few attorneys and a handful of observers who, I assumed, had been paid to sit silently and look interested. Carl and Vera sat on the opposite side of the room with their lawyer, her posture upright, his hands folded tightly together. Callista was already there when I arrived, seated alone, her phone face down on the table in front of her. She didn't look up. Langley stood beside me, briefcase in hand, face unreadable as always. He whispered, "Don't say a word unless they ask you directly. You don't need to explain anything. The documents do that for you." The judge, a middle-aged woman with an air of exhaustion and authority, took her seat and began flipping through the file. She moved slowly, reading through each section. My notarized original will. The forged version submitted by Callista's husband's firm. The report from the handwriting expert. The statement from Marco Aguilar, along with the original logo files and design drafts. When she finally spoke, her voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. "I've reviewed the documentation submitted by both parties," she said, eyes moving across the room, "and the evidence of forgery is substantial." Callista flinched. Carl looked down at the table. Vera reached for his hand, squeezing it with what seemed like more habit than affection. The judge continued. The original will, notarized and stored securely by the decedent's designated executor, Ms. Marilyn Drouet, will be recognized as legally binding. The forged document is rejected and will be forwarded for review under fraud allegations. Callista stood abruptly, voice trembling. She's manipulating the law. This was never about the will. She's trying to ruin us because she never got the attention she wanted growing up. The judge didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at her over her reading glasses. What Ms. Drouet has done is follow the law. That was it. The verdict. I remained seated, my fingers curled loosely in my lap. My heart wasn't pounding. My eyes didn't sting. I felt nothing dramatic. Just a quiet settling, like something that had been misaligned for years had finally clicked into place. I had been named the sole executor. All prior transfers of estate funds were invalid. All family business decisions made in the interim were frozen pending my oversight. On the record, the forgery attempt would live forever. Not just gossip, not a rumor, they had tried to rewrite a legal document, and it had been exposed. When the hearing ended, I stood up slowly. Callista avoided my gaze as she stormed out. Carl followed, his steps slower, heavier. Vera, to her credit, looked at me for half a second, her expression unreadable. Maybe regret. Maybe nothing at all. Outside, the cameras were already waiting. Flashbulbs popped. Microphones thrust forward. Questions flew from every angle. Marilyn, how do you feel about the ruling? Will you be pressing charges against your sister? Do you think your parents should face legal consequences? I didn't answer any of them. I held one envelope in my hand, Langley's suggestion, and passed it to a local reporter. Inside was a brief statement. No drama. No quotes. Just confirmation that the court had ruled in favor of the original executor and that I had no further comment. Back in the rental car, I sat still for a few minutes before starting the engine. The courthouse behind me felt smaller now. Less imposing. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Rather than drive straight back to Seattle, I turned the car toward Napa. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't have to. The drive took a few hours, winding through familiar hills and stretches of vineyards that reminded me too much of childhood, of birthday parties with ice cream cake and family photos where everyone wore forced smiles. As I neared the estate, dusk had begun to settle. The sky burned orange at the edges, and the trees cast long shadows across the driveway. I parked just far enough not to be seen from the house and walked the rest of the way. I didn't knock. Instead, I headed around the back, past the manicured hedges, toward the private memorial garden they had built for Grandma Henrietta. It was modest. A stone bench. A small urn nestled beneath a flowering magnolia. A plaque etched with her name and the words that she saw what others missed. I knelt down and reached into my bag, pulling out a small velvet pouch. Inside were two things. The first, a folded photograph. It was the original version of the family photo they displayed at the gala, the one where they had cropped me out. In this version, I was right there, hand resting gently on Henrietta's shoulder. The second, a note I had written weeks ago but hadn't found the right moment to leave behind. I was always here. Even when you looked away. I placed both items at the base of the stone. No words. No ceremony. Just presence. I didn't cry. I just breathed. For years, I'd fought for a place in a family that saw me as replaceable. That night in court, I hadn't won anything new, I had simply reclaimed what was mine all along. As the sky dimmed, I stood and took one last look at the plaque. It was peaceful here. For once, I didn't feel like I needed to explain myself to a ghost. On the way back to the car, I passed by the side of the house. Through the kitchen window, I saw Vera washing dishes. Alone. No camera, no performance. Just a woman with aging hands and too many secrets. I kept walking. Back in the car, I pulled onto the road and drove without music. I didn't need it. The silence felt earned. Some stories don't end in reconciliation. Some end in recognition. When I left Napa, the sky was the color of ashes. I drove north until the landscape shifted from golden hills to gray city blocks. By the time I reached Seattle, the air smelled like rain again, familiar, quiet, unpretentious. I parked in front of my building and sat in the car for a few minutes, letting the engine tick itself to silence. The courthouse, the cameras, the verdict, all of it felt far away now, like it had happened to someone else. Back inside my apartment, everything was exactly as I'd left it, a mug still on the counter, the same unopened mail, the same potted plant stubbornly hanging on in the window. I made tea instead of coffee. I didn't need caffeine anymore, the fight was over. The sound of the kettle felt louder than it should have in the small kitchen. When the whistle faded, I carried the mug to the balcony. Seattle was alive as always, car horns, distant laughter, the low hum of a city too busy to notice a woman learning how to be still again. I wasn't part of its noise. For the first time in months, no one expected anything from me. No statements. No interviews. No phone calls from attorneys. Just air and quiet and the sound of rain beginning to fall again. I sat there, tracing my thumb along the rim of the mug, thinking about how endings rarely look the way we imagine them. They're quieter, slower, almost anticlimactic. You wait for a grand sense of victory, but what you get is peace, thin, fragile, but real. I don't know how long I sat like that before the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. It was late, and I'd promised myself that tonight would belong to silence. But the name on the screen made me pause. Uncle Frank. The last time I'd heard his voice was at Henrietta's funeral. He'd hugged me awkwardly at the cemetery, told me to keep the family close, and then disappeared back to his own life. I'd stopped expecting anything from him after that. I let it ring twice more before answering. Hello. Marilyn, he said, his voice softer than I remembered. I hope it's not too late. It's fine, I said. I'm awake. There was a pause, long, heavy, the kind that fills with words neither person knows how to start. Then he spoke again. I saw the papers. I read everything. He stopped to clear his throat. I should have said something sooner. I didn't interrupt. I always knew it was you, he continued. Henrietta trusted you for a reason. You were the one who visited her when no one else did. You were the one who listened. I didn't have the guts to stand up when it mattered. His voice cracked a little at the end. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I had spent months bracing against every lie, every twist, every manipulation. I had built armor from silence. But hearing someone finally say what I had always known, that I was seen, it pierced through in a way no verdict could. "Thank you," I whispered. There was a rustle on the other end of the line, like he was nodding even though I couldn't see him. "You did the right thing, kid. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel good, but that doesn't make it wrong." We stayed on the phone for a few more minutes, not saying much. Just breathing. When the call ended, I placed the phone beside me and stared at the dark city beyond the balcony rail. For the first time in weeks, tears came, slow, deliberate, unforced. Not from anger. Not from exhaustion. From release. It wasn't a flood, just a quiet stream that felt more like recognition than grief. When the tears stopped, I went back inside. My apartment was still warm from the tea kettle. I turned on the lamp in the corner, its soft yellow glow wrapping the room in something that felt close to comfort. On the bookshelf sat the black folder labeled "The Truth," itemized. I hadn't opened it since the trial. I took it down and ran my fingers over the cover. It was sealed now, every document inside organized, every loose end tied. The logo Marco had helped me reclaim was framed in a small picture beside it, now legally registered in my name. It sat there like a quiet victory, not something to flaunt, just something that belonged to me. I thought about that night at the gala, the cropped photo, the empty space where I used to be. I didn't need to fill it anymore. Some spaces are meant to stay empty, to remind us what we survived. I walked to my desk and opened my journal. The same one I'd used since all of this began, its pages filled with dates, notes, and fragments of thought. On a new page, I wrote, "Being part of a family isn't about being in the picture. It's about being remembered when no one's looking." I stared at the sentence for a long time before closing the book. It didn't need another word. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Outside, the rain turned heavier, tapping against the window in an irregular rhythm. I made another cup of tea and curled up on the couch, legs tucked beneath a blanket. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. No forgiveness. No reunion. Just peace. It didn't come with applause or validation, but with a kind of stillness that finally felt earned. I thought again about Grandma Henrietta. About the mornings we'd spent together when I was young, her hand wrapped around mine as she'd guide me through her garden. "Everything has its season," she used to say. Even pain. She had been right. This was the end of mine. As I finished my tea, the phone buzzed again, a text this time, from an unknown number. Just one line, "Proud of you." No name, no punctuation. I didn't need one. I smiled, placed the phone face down, and let the moment rest exactly as it was. Some families break you. Others rebuild you. Mine did both. And I rebuilt myself from the pieces they left behind. Sometimes, being part of a family doesn't mean you're treated with love, fairness, or even basic dignity. And when the people closest to you choose to erase your voice, your presence, it becomes your choice to stay silent. Or to stand up and reclaim it. So what do you think defines family, blood, loyalty, or truth? If this story moved you, or made you reflect on your own experience, let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, real-life stories.